Hello, my name is Katie Matthey. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation with the State Charter Schools Commission of Georgia. Over the next few minutes, I will review the annual school performance review process. This year, we're introducing some new updates to the process, so whether you're a first-year school or a veteran school that has participated in performance reviews in the past, please stay tuned. Before we jump into the annual review process, I want to provide the foundation for why we do this work. The mission of the State Charter Schools Commission is to provide students with better educational opportunities than they would otherwise receive in traditional district schools. Upon successful fulfillment of that mission, year over year, we hope to secure our vision of having innovative and superior charter schools advancing education in every community. So whenever we talk about accountability and the processes that the SCSC uses to evaluate school performance, we keep the mission and vision in the forefront of our mind. And as you all are probably aware, the SCSC measures progress towards fulfilling its mission using a tool called the Comprehensive Performance Framework, or the CPF. The CPF measures school performance annually in the areas of academic, financial, and operational performance, each section seeking to answer the fundamental question as written here on the slide. Schools are designated as meeting or not meeting standards for each section, and these designations guide renewal recommendations and participation in other SCSC accountability processes, specifically the annual performance review process. And I'll tell you how CPF designations determine participation on an upcoming slide. But first, I want to point out where the performance review requirement is stipulated in your charter contract. This is not something new that we just made up, nor is it an optional activity. Section 9E of all state charter school contracts read, in the event that the charter school fails to meet standards in accordance with the CPF, the charter school may be required to provide additional information or documentation regarding its performance to the SCSC or make annual in-person report to the SCSC board. Who participates in annual school performance review process? Well, it's any school that earned and approaches or does not meet designation in any section of the CPF, academics, finances, or operations. So the only way that you're exempt from the performance review process is if the school earned and meets designation in all sections, green across the board. And why are we doing this? Well, beyond the fact that it's stipulated in the charter contract, as I just pointed out, its intent is to create a demonstrable record of school performance and efforts to remediate non-performance, to guide the SCSC in imposing meaningful consequences under the charter contract. We're using this process to examine and course correct any issues prior to schools coming up for renewal. So by the time a school gets to renewal, we have a clear picture of where it is, where it struggled, and all its efforts to improve. Okay, and as I noted at the beginning of this presentation, the annual school performance review process is not new, it's just revised from this point forward. So previously, if you did not meet standards in any section, in any of the three sections, schools were required to submit answers to a questionnaire and present an improvement plan to the board at an SCSC meeting. That process wasn't really yielding the results we had hoped for, so we modified the process in an attempt to require more specific responses to areas of concern. Now, if you do not meet standards in any one of the three areas, schools will be placed into one of three tiers. Required follow-up responses, actions, consequences, and outcomes increase with each tier, including but not limited to responding to a questionnaire or presenting at a SCSC board meeting. So essentially, we can still require those same actions that we always have in the past, the questionnaire and the improvement plan, but we have other tools at our disposal as well, and I'll cover those tools on upcoming slides. And we also wanted to ensure that we're implementing different actions based on the level of severity of this, based on the school's CPF scores. So let's talk about the three tiers. Instead of having all schools participate in the performance review process at the same level, we now will categorize schools into tiers based on the SCSC's assessment of issue severity. Tier 1, the notification tier, is the lowest. This might be a case where, let's say, a school meets standards in 2 sections and earned an approaches in the other. We want to highlight to the school that they should be working on improving that approaches designation, but we're fully confident the school can do that without intervention from the SCSC. So in Tier 1, the notification stage, a letter is sent to the school that explains that while the school did not meet performance expectations, SCSC staff have reviewed the school's information and no further action was required at the time. However, the school is strongly encouraged to identify areas of improvement and internally employ relevant interventions. Of course, this is something that we think that you guys should be doing every year when you get your CPF results. This is just us giving that extra level of notification to you all. In Tier 2, the review tier, this includes schools where we have some more uncertainty. So we want to get some more information so we can review it and make determinations from there. The review letter, Tier 2, will outline of areas of concern and require that the school provide a written response addressing specific deficiencies as identified by the SCSC staff. So in that letter, we'll be specific about where the school didn't meet standards and where we still have some current concerns. After reviewing the school's response, and if deemed necessary, the SCSC may also employ required outcomes or place the school on probation. So I should have said before I went into this flow chart here that the solid arrows represent certain actions. So if you don't meet standards, you will receive one of the 3 letters. The dotted arrows indicate possible actions. If you receive a Tier 2 letter, you could be escalated to a Tier 3 letter, or you could be required to participate in required outcomes, or you may not. So the other accountability tools the SCSC may use are in the required outcomes box. Those are the other things that we can require that the school do to increase performance, and we'll cover each of those on the next slide. We'll go into each of those and I'll explain what those are, and you're probably familiar with most of them. Tier 3 is probation. The probation is already established and detailed in SCSC rule. You can go to our website and look up the related rule. I have it listed here in the flowchart so you can see the entire probation process. But that's the 3rd tier. That's the most severe tier in the performance review process. And similar to the Tier 2, as part of probation, the SCSC may require that the school employ any of the required outcomes. So let's take a look at these required outcomes. Here are the first 3 required outcomes: directed or limited use of the administrative withhold funds. So unless you're a new school, you're probably aware of this, that at the end of each fiscal year, the SCSC returns its remaining administrative withhold funds to schools on a prorated basis. If the SCSC identifies an area of noncompliance or issues of concern as part of its review, the SCSC may require that a school use its return withhold funds to remedy such matters. The plan for fund usage will require approval from the SCSC, and the school must sign an attestation form stating that when received, it will use the funds to carry out the plan as approved. So we would reach out to you, we would say, here's your areas of concern. When you get this money back, you need to fix these areas of concern with this money. Please provide us a plan of how you're going to do that. We'll get that plan, we'll review it, and then you'll sign this attestation form saying, when we get the money, we will do what we said we will do. And we're going to expect that there are results that follow up with that we can see down the line. Another possible required outcome is high-risk financial monitoring. So if the SCSC identifies a state charter school with financial concerns that consistently does not meet financial expectations or is currently facing financial hardship, the state charter school will be required to submit regular financial statements and documents. So this is led by our finance division. They will reach out to you and communicate with you what those specific documents are and what the timeline for submitting those documents are as well. And so I think this is typically quarterly. You would submit specific financial documents to the finance team. They'll review that and ensure that you are on track to improvement in that space. The third required outcome listed on this slide here is the performance improvement plan. So, somewhat similar to what we required schools do in the past to tell us about how they will improve. The school may be required to develop and submit a performance improvement plan. The plan must, at a minimum, identify the circumstances that led the school to not meeting the standards and provide a timeline for remedying the circumstances identified. SESC staff may require that the plan includes specific measurable outcomes that must be met throughout or upon completion of the plan's implementation. So, for instance, if the school didn't meet academic standards, we're going to ask that the school do a deep dive into their academic data, assess where the gaps are in learning, and then set goals for closing those gaps, and then how we can measure whether those goals have been met. Often this looks like setting goals in terms of benchmark assessment results, and then we would ask the school to submit to us on a regular basis or in accordance with their assessment schedule, their assessment results, and then their analysis of those assessment results against the measurable goals that are set. So we can ensure that you're not just fulfilling the plan, but you're actually on track with the end goals as identified. Required outcomes continued. We have 3 other required outcomes that we've placed as possible things that the SESC can require that a school do. So a reduction of state or federal funding. So if the SESC or another state or federal agency identifies noncompliance with a rule or law that requires the return or withholding of state or federal funding, the SESC will cooperate with all appropriate parties and implement its contractual authorities to ensure the proper use of public funding. So this can happen in many different scenarios. If you haven't paid the certain entities that are supposed to get paid, you might have a reduction in funding to balance out those funds. If you over-enrolled past your charter contract, you may not get funds for those students. There's many different actions we can take. A lot of times this comes from other agencies as opposed from the SESC. Other agencies will contact us about breaches or non-payment of things, and they'll take action. We're simply saying we will support that action as our authority demands. Required training. If the SESC identifies systematic failures that can be improved or eliminated through subject-specific training, the SESC may require that the state charter school governing boards or staff attend specified training. The school may be required to provide evidence of training attendance or sign an attestation form confirming future participation. So just like we showed with the withhold funds, the administrative withhold funds, if you are planning on, if the training that we need you to attend is in the future, you'll need to sign an attestation form confirming that you will actually participate in this training, and we will try to measure attendance at that. Or if it's one of our specific trainings that we're going to require attendance at, our governance training or some specific training, then we will keep attendance rosters of that and ensure that the school participated in that required training. And then finally, SESC board presentation. The school may be required to attend an SESC board meeting to answer commissioners and staff questions about its performance and present plans for improvement. At least one charter school governing board member and 1 charter school staff member must attend the presentation. This is similar to the requirement in the annual school performance review process in years past. We still can require a presentation if we feel like that is the best method to address the areas of concern. Okay, so what does the timeline for this process look like? Well, it all begins once comprehensive performance framework results for the previous school year are final. So as you know, all CPF data are lagging. You receive the CPF report for the school year prior to the school year that you're currently in. So this presentation is being recorded in January of 2025. At the beginning of February next month, you will receive the CPF report for the 23-24 school year. And that is what initiates the timeline and process for the performance review process. So the performance review process is based off of data from the year prior, not the data that the school, not data from the year that the school is currently in. However, it is an opportunity to provide data from the current school year to show that you have closed any gaps that have been identified from the previous school year. So you should receive your initial CPF report every year for the previous school year in February, towards the beginning of February. And then you're given a few weeks to look at those reports, rebuttal any scores that you think are factually incorrect, and then CPF reports will become final at the beginning of March. Once those are final at the beginning of March, the performance review process kicks off and begins. That's when the tiered letters will be sent. We'll take your CPF for performance, place you into one of the 3 tiers, and then at the beginning of March, you'll receive that tiered letter. If you received a tier 2 or a tier 3, so a tier 2 review or a tier 3 probation letter, then 30 days from when you received that letter, your responses will be due. So if you are on probation, you'll have a corrective action plan. That's what's listed there as a CAP. You'll have a corrective action plan due. If you are a tier 2 review letter, as you'll recall in the review letter, we highlight specific areas of concern and require the school respond back with a written response. So if you were a tier 2, in April is when your responses will be due. And then a few weeks after that, we'll follow up again. So again, if you were a tier 2 school and you were required to provide responses to the review letter, we will follow up in May as to whether we're going to require that you do any of those required outcomes that we just reviewed in the previous slides. So we'll have reviewed your responses and we'll respond back and either say, your responses are good, we don't have any more areas of concern, keep trying to make progress, but the process is over for you at this year. Or we'll respond back and say, we've reviewed your tier 2 letter responses, and there's certain actions that we want you to take to ensure that gap closure occurs. So we'll send those letters out. This will also be the time that if you received a tier 2 letter and we think that we need to escalate you to a tier 3 probation, this is when we'll send out additional probation letters. So anybody that needs to be escalated, they'll receive their probation letter in May. And then 30 days from that, we'll require that all required outcome documentation be due. So if we replied to you in May that we reviewed your tier letter and you need to take these specific required outcomes actions, then at the beginning of June, we're going to say, give us that plan. So if we had said, we need you to use your administrative withhold funds to provide professional development to teachers to improve scores, then at the beginning of June, we're going to want to see your professional development plan for the year moving forward. And then additional corrective action plans for probation are due. So if you received that probation letter in May, then we're going to want to see your corrective action plan or your CAP in June. And then in July, we'll have all required outcomes final documentation due. So once you sent to us your required outcomes plan, say that professional development plan as I used in the previous example, we're going to review that and we're going to respond back to you and say, hey, this is good to go, or hey, you need to edit this here. If we ask for any other documentation, it will be due at the beginning of July, along with those attestation forms for training or for the administrative withhold funds plans. So we'll approve that in June. By the beginning of July, you'll need to have signed your form saying that you will carry out these when you get the money, because you don't get the money for the administrative withhold until later in the fall, I believe. or again, if there's specific training that doesn't happen until later, you'll sign that attestation form. And then the whole process should wrap up. We'd like to get the process wrapped up by the end of July so that when you're beginning the next school year, you can focus on the next school year. So this is the process. There may be some fluctuations here and there in the exact timeframes, but this is the anticipated timeline for the performance review process for this year and all years moving forward. Okay, and then before we wrap up today, I just want to make a note, and I want to highlight that schools can be placed on probation or required to take action that aligns with any of those previously noted required outcomes at any time, even outside of the performance review process in this timeline that I just shared, if those circumstances warrant such placement according to the terms listed in SCSC rule or as determined by SCSC staff. So I say that to say, although it would be nice to always just follow the performance review process and do it in a nice, clear timeline, we know that there are issues and emergencies and struggles and obstacles that come up all throughout the school year, and they're not just a result of what we see in the CPF, and that may require that the SCSC put a school on high-risk financial monitoring, for instance, or probation, or require that you do a training outside of the timeline that I just presented, outside of the performance review process. We reserve the right to employ any of these accountability tools at any point in time, but the annual school performance review process is the time that we can do it in a structured way based off of CPF scores from the year prior. Okay, and that is it. Those are all of the updates for the annual school performance review process. They go into effect immediately. So next time you get your CPF report, like I said, this is being recorded in January 2025, so you should get your 23-24 school year CPF report at the beginning of February. So in the next couple weeks, we will then start this process in March, so just up in the upcoming months. All of the information about this process, this presentation, a guidance document that outlines the entire process, a one-page flow chart so you can get that high-level review of the process. All of these items are on the SCSC website. Go to the School Accountability and Renewal tab that's at the top menu. Click on that tab, and then you'll be able to click into the specific web page about the annual school performance review process to find all of this documentation. You can also reach out to me if you have any questions. Again, my name is Katie Manthe. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation. If you go to the Contact the Commission page on our website, it provides all SCSC staff email addresses, so you can also reach out to me with any questions. I appreciate your time and your cooperation as we move to having great educational options for students all throughout Georgia. Thank you.